Well, it sounds like CLG has come to an end. If you don't know what I'm talking about, definitely check out the other video on Travis's channel, posted a couple before this, about the end of CLG. It's crazy times to hear that. In this video, I want to talk about kind of the past in terms of things that might have gone wrong that contributed to some of the oldest orgs in the LCS dying effectively, or not being interested in the LCS, and potentially in the case of TSM. We'll touch on both of them actually. Then there's also the present to talk about in terms of like what it means to lose some of your most historic orgs, and then the future as well. And I'm actually not going to tackle them in that order. I'm going to go present, future, past. But yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about on the blame game today. Assigning blame, I guess, to things that went wrong. Now, in the present tense, there's really nothing positive about this situation with CLG or either with TSM, assuming the rumors are accurate. The fact that two of your most historic orgs, the ones that a lot of the biggest rivalries in the LCS were built off of, are simultaneously starting to leave the scene. CLG sounds a lot more imminent. It sounds like, you know, NRG, based off that rumor that was reported, is the ones buying them maybe. And then I don't think they'll retain the brand name because they have other esports where sometimes like an ownership group will take over and retain a brand. Doesn't sound like that's going to happen with CLG, but there's an outside chance that the historic angle of it is more relevant than NRG's not great history in the LCS. We'll have to see. And then for TSM, it sounds less like they are financially incapable of continuing on, or like their ownership group sold them. It sounds like MSG sold their esports shit, and then, you know, to NRG, like the League of Legends team is still going to exist because these rosters exist, and that's just going to NRG. With TSM, it sounds more like they're just not interested in the LCS anymore based off the pullback completely on spending. It sounds like TSM has had a bit of a tenuous relationship with the LCS in recent years anyways, and then on top of that fact, it was saying that maybe they're trying to go to Brazil or other regions. Those are all things that, you know, even if TSM doesn't exit the space, or it's not like the death of the brand or anything like that, at least their relationship to the LCS in North America seems to be in its last legs. Like, it's coming to an end, it feels like. So both those orgs are on their way out. And of course, as a fan of the LCS, either a new fan or an old fan, that's fucking terrible news. As an old fan, it's like, these are, you know, the things that got you invested in the first place leaving, you know, these ancient rivalries, the Bay Life, the CLG in Korea, the gaming houses when they were just starting up, you know, like I remember all that shit. It's crazy to me that these teams are effectively out potentially in the near future. And even for new fans who might not have been there for those moments, can at least join something that has a history. And I think that kind of stuff can add a lot when you become a fan of a scene and suddenly there's all this stuff that happened that you get to consume and learn about, and all these things. I can say that I went through that a little bit, like in the Smash scene when I got into that and watched the Smash doc, seeing this rich history of all these pros and stuff like that, that this scene has is really cool. You know, and I think to lose them and to have, like, you know, TSM, who made it to the first 8 straight finals, I think it was, or 10 maybe, like for the first 5 years they didn't miss a finals, you know, like so many banners through them, so many of the biggest matches are theirs. CLG and TSM in Madison Square Garden to this day is basically the biggest match in LCS history, at least like domestically, obviously. Like that kind of stuff, it's both these orgs, and it's crazy that these are the two that are kind of going out. We've had a lot of churn of orgs over the years, so it's not like we've never had this happen, but I think this is the first time, if I'm not mistaken, that title contenders have churned out. I don't think, not contenders, even title holders, excuse me, I don't think any org that won a title has left the LCS yet. I could be forgetting one somehow. But yeah, I think it is on a different level. So like, we have gone through orgs leaving, especially like even like semi-high profile ones, like Immortals left and came back and this kind of stuff. So it's not like this is like maybe I don't know, CLG as an org somehow regroups, but I don't know why it would or anything like that. Even if some of the people there are still there. On that historic angle, obviously sucks. On the people angle, sucks even more. A lot of people have been getting laid off across the tech sector, and esports is like tangential to that, obviously a part of it. So a lot of ownership groups are downsizing the companies that they've invested in the LCS and companies like that in esports. So a lot of people have just been losing their jobs. It's been all over the place in the esports scene, and so like this is just another version of that in a sense, and it really sucks for all the people who are now jobless at the end of this. So yes, there's very, very little upside to this situation. The only kind of upside that you can potentially argue, and like I don't firmly believe this, but I'll play devil's advocate, is that orgs that are not super invested in the LCS and it's, you know, participating leaving is like, in some sense you can argue good, because hopefully the next person that comes in is more invested, more interested. Madison Square Garden, from what I understand, have always kind of had like this like weird arm's length relationship with CLG, and they've never like really gotten it. I've heard from people inside there and stuff, so it's not like they were some insano partner, though it sucks that the brand of CLG is going, from what sounds like the MSG decision. For TSM, again, like it sounds like, you know, going minimum salaries, which is what Travis was saying potentially is the case, on all your pros, and basically having Chowie one-man army, the TSM branch of things. You know, it's like, that's not someone who seems super invested. It's the kind of thing that Carlos and Reggie in the past had derided teams for doing, which is like just skating by on the minimums that are kind of provided for by Riot. And that, if that's the future of what TSM is in the LCS, I think, you know, there's potentially people who are interested in doing more in the scene. And so like, that's kind of the you know, happy, like the positive angle, but I don't firmly believe this in any way. I still think it's obviously just horrible news to lose basically your two biggest teams historically, at least. This brings me into the future, and like the LCS is dying, because that's of course what naturally you think about when a historic org turns out that the league is dead, the scene is dead, it's all gonna die. And I think that's what's really cool about the conversation we had with Steve on Hotline League last night. If you missed it, he kind of called in as we were talking about some of this kind of stuff, and like the monetization future of the LCS, and is this a sustainable business, and can like teams actually make this work. And we talked about the audience. You know, there's like 100,000 that watch pretty consistently right now. Who knows if that dips lower? It had been on a downward trend. There's been weird time changes, all these things that contribute. That's a separate can of worms I think I'll get into more in the past section. But at the very least, as the current viewership stands, Steve was saying that like there should be enough of an audience based off these numbers to like have a sustainable business. And he was talking about how a lot of orgs bought in and had like a runway period to turn it into a sustainable business, or like maybe they just had a bad conception of what this business was, and that runway is running out as this economic stuff is going on. And in that sense, it's somewhat even decoupled a little bit from the LCS. Of course, if the LCS was booming and like this insano business, they wouldn't do it. But the runway can shrink because the business itself, and also the other factors of the people who had bought in. So I think it's a little bit of both, obviously. And in that case, I think probably the economic downturn has had a bigger impact in that sense than like going from 160K concurrent average to 100K concurrent average. Obviously that's a big deal and not good. It's something that should be fixed. But I'm just saying that like, I don't know if that would have churned out teams at the same rate if there weren't these other problems going on. On the plus side, Steve and many others are still long-term believers of esports and stuff like that. And I also am as well. I think I also have the opinion that like the LCS is not dead. I know that I've said this before, that like on the internet, dead means lower than your peak. Effectively, it's gone downhill. Dead is like, I'm no longer interested. But there is still a healthy ecosystem. It's still, I'm pretty sure, outside VCT, which just launched this weekend, but like prior to literally this weekend, despite the downturn that's had for a couple splits in a row now, it's still the most viewed NA esports product consistently. I don't mean to bright side the future entirely by just being like, well, Steve's still bullish and there's an audience, so we're fine. Of course, this is concerning, and it should be a bit of a red flag. People love to say the canary in the coal mine thing. G-Bay ruined that phrase. He used it fine, but then Reddit picked up on it. Anyways, the point is that like it should set off alarm bells that like things need to change. Really they do. And exactly what those changes are, you know, who knows? We talked a lot on Hotline League about like the grassroots way that esports came up is probably what we need to go back to a little bit. It was obviously an overextension by a lot of teams in terms of what they thought this business would become and try to get it there. And that is not really the place that it's at. And, you know, these insane spendings on everything is probably not sustainable for most teams in the league. It sounds like, you know, for a team Liquid who is able to make a lot of good partnerships and have a lot of different streams of revenue, that they can maybe continue, you know, working at this level, maybe down a little bit, not quite back to like gamers, a coach in a home, you know, that maybe not the exact level it needs to go back down to. But I think the dropping of player salaries and some of these giant facilities that players are playing in, like these kinds of things can go in a sense, and the scene still carry on and be fine in air quotes. But it is obviously concerning in saying that like the way things have been operating, is not sustainable, and that stuff does need to change. And of course, there's probably gonna be more turnover in the future as more of these businesses, as Steve says, runs out of runway based off what they thought they were getting sold on. The final thing I'll say before I jump into the past is also just that, like, I wonder how much of this is the natural progression of any esport. It's a young industry. In some sense, it's still its early days, but based off how games industry works and gamers work, there's always a desire for the new, shiny, better thing. And sports have a bit of this longevity to them that they're timeless, and there's nothing to stop you from going out and playing soccer. And there's like no soccer 2.0 really that needs to exist. It is what it is. Whereas like games don't really have that feel. You play this, you play that, your friends move to the new hot thing. It's the same way like you wouldn't watch the same movies over and over. Like games fall more into art for a lot of people than sport, and like art is always evolving in that sense. And like I think it leads to a situation where I just wonder if there's any super long-term sustainable ecosystem in a sense. Not to sound too doomer here, but like I just don't want to go around painting blame on a bunch of things if this is somewhat a natural evolution of like games get popular, there hits this crescendo of when it's going to be its biggest that it's ever going to be, like a World of Warcraft, and it comes back down and it settles into like what is its sustainable future, which again, like WoW is like, it's still there, it still exists. That's what I kind of look at. Like obviously StarCraft had its insane thing. StarCraft esports still kind of exists. Smash Bros has gone up and down and upflowed a bunch of different ways. So like I think that there are a lot of futures where this esport continues on, but it does feel like life cycle of an esport is not up and to the right. It's like you hit this peak and you come back down to what it will be, and it'll go up and down within that, but it's hard to ever get back to like the glory days that you once had. However, we're not going to duck anything that might have gone wrong in the past entirely, so let's go back there and talk about some of the things that kind of maybe accelerated this natural progression or caused it. Who knows? We have to start with franchising because this is kind of, I think, the inflection point of a lot of LCS history, where it went from 5 guys in a dream, and that was kind of dying anyways as we were hitting the 2016, 2017 time periods. But obviously it really got shot in the head with the influx of VC money that came in. This was a time period where esports were just going super mainstream. It wasn't just League of Legends. Obviously there's Overwatch League, but like Fortnite was hitting this kind of critical mass as well in this time period where it's like, oh my God, Drake's playing and Ninja's huge and he's on Times Square. And like just culturally, gaming was going through this kind of like pushing into the mainstream in a sense that like obviously everyone plays games, a lot of people play games, but old people were seeing esports, I guess is the nicest way to put it. And that led to a lot of people who didn't really get it and probably bought into some stuff that they didn't know what they were doing. And it's worth noting that like the scene in that time period had its problems. I think a lot of people who weren't around then or not like super close to the scene, just like as a fan watching, you liked relegations, you liked promotions, these kinds of things, the 5 guys in the dream that you kind of got with that, and it got ruined in a sense by franchising. But there were other problems, like the challenger scene was full of people who were effectively elo boosting teams, where they would buy a bunch of like Korean players or like ex veterans and these kinds of things and put them on a team to try and qualify, and then they would sell that spot to people who believed in the product more long term. And it was like this kind of like flipping that was going on that was not super healthy, as well as the fact that like because the tier 1 and tier 2 were so different in terms of eyeballs, that like qualifying into the LCS was the most important thing you could do, which again, even if you didn't want to flip your team, led to you having a bunch of veterans on your roster to qualify instead of like young talent as 5 guys in the dream, because orgs who were paying salaries would pay for names that they knew already, and they were the ones who had better training facilities and these kinds of things, and those usually crowded out the teams that were trying to fight for their way in. And so you saw a bunch of like kind of VC backed teams anyways who had this vision buying the teams and players, and like they were the ones getting all the resources, and a lot of the up and coming talent was getting not believed in yet and kind of pushed to the side. Some people still bought in on some young talent, but a lot of the times it was not a ton of opportunities given to them. And like C9 would have 2 orgs running, and they would like flip a team. They've kind of done the same thing in Academy, honestly, where they have a bunch of really good Academy players and then try and sell them off to people and stuff like that. But at the very least, it was like not a healthy scene. And it's not like franchising was the only way forward to deal with this. And I think there is an opportunity cost. I was someone who was admittedly pro franchising back in the day, because the thing that I hated was the lack of opportunity for younger NA talent. And because there was this constant pressure in the middle where teams who were in the LCS needed to play for now as opposed to invest in the future, because if you lost your spot, it was death knell. And the teams underneath them were not young talent either, because they were these VC-backed teams anyways, who were elo boosting teams or just like trying to get the spot no matter what. So the entire middle part here had no room for a lot of like investment in any talent. And the idea and the way it was kind of pitched, and maybe I drank the Kool-Aid, was that like if you protected the teams at the bottom, they could then look towards the future. And very clearly that did not really happen once franchising came in. It's not been many teams who have really taken a long-term approach. Honestly, as bad as Golden Guardians have been, I feel like they have oftentimes given a chance to younger talent more than some others. Not that it's always worked, they've done a great job at it, but like a lot of teams just like if they can't get the A or B list talent, they'll just grab C tier veterans or something like that. And that was the case for a long period of time in the LCS. And like no shot to like any of the players who were getting jobs then or anything, but like it wasn't the kind of like, okay, I'm not competitive this split, I'm going to sign these 2 veterans to help lead the team and like these 3 rookies and like try and mix it. Like it just didn't really become that. You lost the promo relegation system. You did get more permanent partners, you know, and we've talked about permanent partners versus like long-term partners in the new Valorant ecosystem, whether permanent partnership was a mistake. And all that stuff is focused on kind of the bottom tier of what was going on. And I don't think franchising would have really stopped the top echelon of what happened, which was salary inflation, because you did lose this kind of like battle to stay alive, and teams who are terrible in the LCS stayed terrible in a sense because like they weren't going to get removed and their games became uninteresting. You lost some of the drama of the bottom tier, and I totally relate to fans who liked seeing that or new teams break in and some of the storylines that came in there, as opposed to just like hoping a rookie got a shot. And it felt like for a long period of time, and even still a little bit, the flow of young talent to N8 teams has not been good because of the import reliance. But a lot of that stuff existed prior towards franchising anyways, again, and it wasn't like franchising just changed why it was a problem and the ways it was a problem, but it already was a problem. And I think other solutions could have solved it other than franchising. But like the franchising idea was, 1, helping solve that problem, 2, finding partners who would invest in the scene and believe in esports long term instead of having this churn. And like you didn't really know if the guy who you were getting that was promoting in was actually a good business person or not. There were a lot of sleazy people back then, and not like there are none now, but like generally speaking, it's not as scummy in some of those areas as it was in the past. And then again, to get back to salary inflation, like that was probably going to happen anyways, given the interest level that gaming was receiving by mass media at the time. A lot of people were looking to get in. A lot of teams were already getting VC funding around that period anyways, or were deep in talks prior towards franchising. And of course, franchising being on the horizon made those talks accelerate. And you know, some of that stuff was going to happen no matter what. And the guaranteed position caused probably more value to be added than just investing in a team and hoping they would stay good and relevant. But of course, like the arms race was always going to happen in that kind of like, we're going to sign top talent, we have to offer them more money, we're going to import more. Like, I don't think franchising changed the way Steve was going to 100% attack the LCS and try and become relevant. It just gave him probably more money to do so. And that, of course, is a problem. But again, I think the VC money probably would have came in anyways. And I think the things that are more concerning than the VC bubble, because that's its own thing, you know, some of the formatting problems that franchising didn't fix. On that VC money front, I think that is a big problem in the sense that it blew up salaries. It made it very hard to become a sustainable ecosystem where there's just way more money getting pumped in than it's generating in a sense. And so like, even if franchising didn't happen, you would probably have built a bubble anyways, just with all this going on. Like Overwatch League spots were like insanely expensive, you know, like all this stuff was kind of happening. And so I think there's a high likelihood that you would have gotten a bubble even without a franchising model, with just VC money coming in and pumping salaries into players. Already, you know, like challenger level players were well into 6-figure range by the time like that kind of stuff was going on. And I don't think you could argue that the viewership at that time in the academy system, or the brands of the players getting these salaries justified that price tag. And ultimately, it's that kind of reason that a lot of the churn happens when an org loses faith in what the LCS is, when there's management changes in these parent companies that no longer think the LCS has any value. You see this kind of churn go on. That's one of the big problems with it. The other problem is, again, the sustainability of that kind of going on. Separately from all that talk, there is the question about viewership and why it went down. And part of it would be the format, maybe some of the narrative about how much NA pros get paid versus how well they're doing. Push that as well. Travis has often talked about this little study he did at one point in time about why fans lost interest in the LCS. And the number one thing was kind of that they didn't feel like they had a connection to pros anymore in players. He believes that's due to the churn of pro players. I think that I don't personally buy into that. I think there's a lot of churn in a lot of leagues. I think there's a lot of things that you can talk about in terms of like with the VC money, maybe players didn't feel as obligated to put themselves forward, or they focused more just on gameplay versus the other things that caused the scene to become popular in the first place. That kind of grassroots community feel definitely disappeared around this like Corpo time. You got just less access to pros, and not even like streaming, but just like you used to see them on Reddit, and like you would just like talk to them and stuff. Like there's just no pros on Reddit in the comments anymore like it used to be or anything like that. I'm not saying they should be because it's toxic as hell, but like that was something that we used to see all the time. So like there's that concern. There's again how broadcast developed, both in terms of its content as well as its formats. As we tried best of 3 at different points in time, there was the online broadcast. There was like the made by many approach. We did things where summer splits suddenly carried your games over from spring. We're at new time slots now. We've shifted that kind of stuff around a lot. Like there's a lot of format things that seem to impact the viewership quite a bit. There's, again, like I said, the broadcast decisions, which for the sake of this video, I won't launch into all of them because it's already becoming quite long. But there's a lot of things you can talk about there. There's also performance, the fact that NA really has not had too many successes and has become the global punching bag. It was like a little bit more contentious than the 2014-2015 era, but like it went downhill. It went from like, oh, haha, you know, like EU got the better of us by a little bit this time, but we'll get those rascally kids next time. And once it became 3 or 4 straight years of clearly being the worst of the major regions, that felt like it really took a toll on fans' mentality, and it became very negative. It just became very vitriolic, and like some of the fun was gone. And I'm not saying it's 100% the fans' fault, because like commentators did it too, creators, other pros, like it just like became this disdain for NA. And so like I think the reason it's important to look into the past and identify which of these problems might have caused the downturn is because I don't believe that there's no road back to higher viewership. I personally don't think that like NA is doomed and it's going to die completely. And I not only completely, but like that it can't recover. And that's why I think it's important to look at all these variables in the past and say like, which ones mattered the most and like what can we now have the tools to fix? Because one of the problems about like the permanent partnership things is like, it's in ink, you know, it's like, this is a contract now. It's like, I don't think there's a way to get out of it other than LCS offering to buy these spots back or like negotiating a deal in these contracts that all the teams agree to and this kind of stuff. So like, it's a very hard problem to solve. You can't just easily like, fuck franchising, you know what, that wasn't a good experiment, let's kill it. You know, like that is a large commitment to do, but like some of these other things you can. And that's why I think that Travis questionnaire is like, I would love to see more effort put in by like Riot and other people to like really dig into like things that fans think and feel. And no offense to fans, this is just true of all people, but like people are very good about identifying how they're feeling. They're not always great about identifying why that's the case. So like I can say that on the broadcast, for example, during the COVID years, we did a really, really bad job of getting pro players' faces and personalities in front of the fans. And that, I think, led to that kind of feeling, or at least partially led to a feeling of not having players that they really connected to well. And I think that's something that we've done a lot better job of in recent years. And, you know, I think like trying to figure out the problems to solve for the future is big, because I always reference this, but like in 2017 summer, LEC hit its lowest viewership ever at like just above 100K, which is basically where the LCS is at right now. And what they did to recover was not just a single thing, but they got the time slots and some of these things that they thought they needed. They got a rebrand. They were able to make content the way they wanted. There was internal structure in how LEC and LCS operated as like kind of overlapping more than they should have been, being pulled apart and given their own room to work with. They also saw international success. There's a lot of these things that's hard to identify a single variable as like why the LEC bounced back, but the LEC bounced back, and 3 years later in summer had up to 300,000, 3x the viewership again. Part of that was also COVID. People were inside and watching. Globally, there was a big bump in viewership during that time period. But either way, like, you can come back from it, and I think there's a lot of lessons to learn. I hope the LCS is kind of going through that right now in terms of like, we're doing different things with the brand and how we're approaching things. I think the LEC was given a lot of investment in not just, you know, the brand, but also like giving it opportunities with time slots and things like that. Like, I think it is worth, after this year, or even this split, retroing and seeing like, okay, this was, you know, a split at this time slot. What was the effect, do we think? You know, like, I think all these things are going to need to be answered if you want the LCS to bounce back in a realistic way. Anyways, that's going to do it for the blame game. Sorry it was very incoherent and rambly, but it was just a very deep topic. You know, obviously it starts with just feeling very bad for those brands and for fans to lose those brands, and then the people who work at those brands. But that leads to the bigger questions, and just want to dig into those a little bit. That's going to do it for me here. I'll catch you guys later.
Thanks so much for watching that video. I'm going to be heading to spring finals, and I hope to see you there. And the whole reason I'll be able to be there is because Alienware sponsors the channel and allows me to do things like go to spring finals. So if you're in Raleigh, come by, say hi, and shout out Alienware. And then also go purchase some Alienware products at alienware.com/Travis. Purchase all their products. That, you know, I mean, within reason, whatever your means are. I'm not trying to get you into any kind of debt, but they got great products. So if you're going to purchase something, just go there. There's a link in the description.